Parents' Perspectives, a new podcast from Affect Autism.
Welcome back, Floortimers. I have another edition of Parent Perspectives this week, and I am thrilled to have this group of lovely parents from the Buffalo area, just across the lake from me, here to discuss all kinds of stuff about Floortime. We have Bethany, who is the mother of 6, of whom 2 are neurodivergent, 1 with an autism diagnosis, and they range in age from 14 to 32. Heather is the mother of 3, of whom 2 are autistic boys and 1 is a neurotypical girl, ranging in age from 3 to 8. And we have Megan and Mark, who are the parents of 1 autistic son who is 7. And they are all in Bridget Palmer's DIR parent support group, Developmental Individual Differences Relationship-Based Model. And Bridget, being a colleague of mine at the International Council on Development and Learning, who is a DIR expert and a speech-language therapist. Today, we're going to discuss how they found Floortime, any struggles finding or accessing or keeping Floortime services, and how DIR changed their view of their neurodivergent children and has given them hope. So welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you.
So let's start with you, Bethany, because you're the first on my screen. 6 children. I am in awe at just that alone. How did your journey begin?
As you mentioned, I have 6 children. My first son is the first one that we would now call neurodivergent. He was born in the 90s, and it was very misunderstood at that time. Meltdowns and behaviors that he was displaying were thought to be bad, needed punishment, and given mental diagnoses with prescriptions of medication. So that was a long journey. And then, so my other son now is 17. So the difference between them, and he didn't speak and my older son did. So along the journey, I did discover that speaking, there's more to communicating than just speaking. Just because you can speak doesn't truly mean that you can totally communicate. So my second son did not meet any of his milestones and was not speaking. He was nonverbal for a while. He is fully verbal now, thanks to DIR. When he got the autism diagnosis, I always say this, is that the diagnosis of autism was so welcomed versus the mental diagnoses of my older son. The mental diagnoses came with a lot of judgment, scrutiny, punishment. There was not any real understanding or positive treatment towards those, or myself as a mother for those. Whereas the autism diagnosis was completely different. So as soon as he had that diagnosis, people showed up at my house to help him, which is something I had not had in the past. And that is how I ended up coming along to Floortime. Is the first speech pathologist who I actually knew, she was a friend of the family, that came in was not a DIR, and I didn't know anything about DIR. I didn't even know, this is when I come along this process is where I'll learn the words regulation or co-regulation or any of those things. But I did know that I wasn't thinking it was a good fit how she was with my son that didn't speak. She came in with a planned agenda ahead of time of how she was going to teach him and what they were going to do. And for an example, she would hold a toy cookie in front of him because she thought she heard him say the sound "k" before. So she'd hold it in front of him and say cookie, and he'd go to reach for it, and she'd pull back and say cookie, but she couldn't do because he couldn't speak, and he'd hurl his body on the floor because he couldn't have the cookie. So she would write, this would happen time and time again, and she would write, I'm unable to teach this child, he has meltdowns. And so it just wasn't working out for us. So I asked early intervention if there was someone else. And that's when Bridget came. So that's how I kind of just fell into Floortime. And I've said to Bridget multiple times, we laugh about how when she came and she got down on the floor and played with him, that I thought she was just playing with him, right? Which was still better than the meltdowns. But I didn't really know what was happening. But if I have time for another quick story about that, the other teacher would take his hands and touch his hands and put them over hers to try and get him to do the sign for more. and he didn't want anyone touching him. So he would have meltdowns and kick and scream then, and she would write that in her notebook. Bridget just kind of followed him around going into what he was doing, and he loved cards, and every time he took one, he'd say, or she'd say, oh, you're taking more. He never seemed to get it. I mean, months and months went by, and then we took him to an amusement park and put him on a ride. We put him back in the stroller. We had no idea if he liked it, and his little hands came up and did the sign for more. So we knew that he had gotten it, that she had broken through to him. The method of teaching had worked. And so that's how I was introduced to Floortime, if that was what the first question was.
Yeah, no, I love it. And you know what you say is so true in so many parents' stories. If they're new to floor time, it just, what are you doing? You look like you're just playing with my kid. Aren't you a speech therapist? Aren't you supposed to be getting my kid to talk and all of that? And then the more you learn about DIR, the more you learn about communication. You had said, just because you can speak doesn't mean you can necessarily communicate. And then we talk about the reverse. Just because you can't speak doesn't mean you can't communicate. So
Correct.
yeah, I love all of that, and how you kind of were seeing the progress even though you didn't necessarily know how it worked yet.
Right. I mean, the moment his hands came up and did the sign is a moment my whole family will never forget, because we were kind of like, is he retaining any of this? Is he getting it? But he didn't need to use it until he needed to, right? So, I mean, when the other teacher was trying to force him to do it before his time or before he was ready, it wasn't ever going to work. So that's how I got introduced to Bridget. But Bridget, I'm sure we'll get into that later, but that completely changed my life and my relationship with my other son, which we can get into a little bit later as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that. We'll go to Heather next. How did your journey begin?
So my oldest son, when he was 2 years old, was not speaking very much at all. He would say a couple of words, and we brought it up to the pediatrician, and we were told to give it more time because we had such a good, like, affectionate relationship with him. And at the time, I was pregnant with my daughter, and my son started just crying more and more, like very prolonged meltdowns. And of course, I was blaming myself, like, I'm not carrying him around as much because I'm pregnant, or, he just needed certain routines and we had to follow those closely. So personally, as a mom, I was thinking more and more, I think he may need an autism diagnosis. And by the time he was 2.5 and my daughter was born, we really insisted on a speech evaluation at least. And with early intervention, the speech therapist had recommended an OT evaluation. And when the OT was there, she was saying, I would recommend an autism evaluation. So we did start speech and occupational therapy, but there was such a long wait list for an autism evaluation. So for about 6 months, we were just going with those two therapies, and he was really enjoying therapy. He was making a little bit of progress. It was when we were transitioning. So here, when you turn 3, you have to transition from early intervention to CPSE. And
What does that stand for?
I believe it's Committee on Preschool Special Education. So it's when the school district plays more of a role in providing therapies when you turn 3. And they send all their own evaluators to come and do new evaluations. So he hadn't really been in early intervention that long. And I didn't know until later that our OT was a floor timer, and he was just doing very well with them. But with the new evaluations, I was being told, because he wasn't very cooperative with these people coming into our house, I was being told that we just needed to discipline him more. And he was just an active boy who was very manipulative. And he was crying over things like his pant leg went up, or he cried because on Halloween, someone put the candy in his bucket and he wanted to put the candy in his bucket, and he cried for an hour. And I was thinking, this is not manipulation. This boy's upset. So, like, as parents, we were very upset. So that's when I really insisted we need an evaluation now, because I knew we were not getting any real help, and he wasn't getting the sympathy that he should have been getting, because we saw him in distress where other people just saw him being naughty. So then we did end up getting an autism diagnosis when he was a little over 3. And our school district had really only presented ABA as an option with a program. We started sending him to that program and he just completely regressed. Any progress he made in early intervention, we saw him crying for hours every day. I think it was only 2 weeks in, and I was telling the school, I would like him to stay for speech, but I will pick him up after that. He doesn't like the classroom. This was a boy who was very happy between his meltdowns generally, and he was just in distress the whole day before and after school. So we had a lot of times of pulling him in and out of the program, but as a parent, when you feel like you have no other options, it's very difficult to go to doing nothing. And we did that for quite a while until COVID hit. So they changed everything to virtual. And I just said, I'm not doing that. I'm not trying to sit him in front of a computer. We wanted to quit anyway, so that was perfect for us. I finally reached out to a college friend who was friends with a speech therapist who was friends with Bridget, and that wild connection connected me with Bridget. Talking to her, I was very skeptical because we had become used to not working well with his therapist when he was in pre-K 3. And I would almost have a visceral response during therapies where I was in fight or flight at some points because I felt like when he's having a meltdown, I had to almost defend him so that they weren't punishing him. So talking to Bridget, it was so refreshing because she knew exactly what I was talking about. Even just talking about like his very selective diet. And I said, I don't want to force him to eat food if it's going to be distressing for him. And she understood what I meant by that, which is not very typical with every therapist out there. So she ended up finding us a beautiful team of therapists to work with him for pre-K 4, which was all virtual over the computer. But that worked out very well because by that time he had learned to really hate therapies and he would run away from his therapist. He hated anything like that. So when we started on the computer, he would be running around the room trying to close the computer and we're sitting there pulling our hair out like, how do we even make this work? I was constantly buying new toys to try to get him to play in front of the computer. And Bridget was saying, that's not really necessary. We'll make it work. But we had no idea what they were really doing. I think similar to Bethany, we didn't know that they were doing anything specifically. They were just kind of talking to him and playing with him over the computer. And I think a real standout moment for us was when his OT had recommended putting rubber bands on a toy car of his to see if we could make a game of him taking them off. And he became so upset. He threw himself on the ground and he was crying. And I got sweaty. My heart was pounding. I was thinking, what does this woman think of him? And she just said, I am so sorry. That's your car. I'm sorry. And it was like, it was such a moment because we weren't used to therapists being empathetic with him anymore. So then we really just let them do whatever they wanted to. And we didn't know what they were doing. But by the end of the year, he had made so much progress that I will love Floortime for the rest of my life.
That I really resonate with a lot of what you said. My son had behavioral type services, and same thing. I was the one dysregulated during those, and asking like, what is the point of this? And so, yeah, you bring back those, memories of just being so distressed with therapists, and then just the refreshing feeling that you have when you actually have somebody who understands children and child development and having empathy for your child and understanding that whole idea of sensory processing and all those issues that make things difficult for our children, motor planning and all of that. So yes, thank you for that. We'll go on to Megan and Mark now. How about your story?
You want to say?
Go ahead.
Okay. So we had started going through the autism evaluation, and we were getting early intervention services, and then COVID hit and we were offered more. So we were offered family training with Bridget, and that is how we discovered DIRFloortime. And it was a godsend because we were also doing therapies on the computer, which were terrible. And before that, we had them in Montessori school, which everybody else, their kids loved it. Our kids did not. It was pretty terrible. We started sending a special education teacher through early intervention to meet him at Montessori school, and they were trying to make it work, and it just wasn't working. He wasn't making any progress. He didn't really enjoy going. And then we met Bridget, and she really helped us learn how to connect with him and get down on his level. And that's when he finally started communicating a little bit with signs. He was nonverbal until he was about 6.5. He's starting to use his words now a little bit in an AAC device. But DIRFloortime really, that it helped build that connection with him so that he could communicate with us, because we struggled with that for a really long time. And now he's been at a DIRFloortime school for pre-K and then for kindergarten first and now second grade. So we've seen a lot of progress thanks to DIR.
Oh, that's wonderful. And it's so nice to hear stories of how the first thing that families find is DIR. Now, I know it wasn't necessarily the first thing you found, but it was pretty close to the first thing you found. So consider yourself lucky, because I know,
We did.
yeah, a lot of people go through, well, Bethany being an example of that. So let's circle back to Bethany now. And let's talk about, yeah, just going through that process of learning about floor time and seeing these things happen with your younger non-speaking child. And you said that it impacted the way you interacted with your older child, who's also neurodivergent, the one who's 32 now, correct?
Correct. Yes. So my older son was extremely difficult. He had meltdowns multiple times a day, broke things in the house. And unfortunately, it was just all viewed, as I mentioned, as bad behavior. Like one of the other, like Heather said, I had never realized this really till she said it. It made me remember back that in between the meltdowns, he was a happy, funny, beautiful boy. And it's just the time that we were in, nobody understood it. And I really was being made to feel that I was wrong to want to naturally mother this child the way I wanted to. I knew that he needed help, but I was being told that that was wrong. I was being given, the book Parenting It Isn't for Cowards. I was being told if that was my kid, I'd take the belt to him. And not only from friends and relatives and school people, but doctors too. I mean, I took him to try and see, when he was a teenager, I had heard of Asperger's, and I thought, well, that sounds a lot like him. We went to a lot of doctors, and that doctor said to me, oh, it's not Asperger's, it's a personality disorder, which that's what psychopaths have, and I don't deal with that. And there's no way. He is such a caring, loving, wonderful, he's actually my hero for having to live through being misunderstood, even from the people he's supposed to understand him. So when Bridget came in with my younger son, I'm in this now really about 15-year nightmare at this point of trying to figure this out and fighting against almost everyone in our life to say that I have this good boy, he needs help, and nobody sees it that way. They think he needs punishment. And so when I started learning this I'd watching Bridget. Now, my younger son did have meltdowns, and I watched the way Bridget reacted to him, which every single thing about it was teaching me. I'm flashing back when she's teaching my younger son. I'm flashing back to my older son, who at this point wasn't even living with me. I had to send him to grandparents on a 2-week basis, like go stay there for 2 weeks, because he was just hurting people in the house. And everybody was dysregulated, which wasn't even a word that was on our radar at that time. But now looking back, that's what it was. But anyway, so I don't know if any of you have tried to play a board game with any of your neurodivergent children, but when it doesn't go their way, and the whole board goes. So we were doing this with Bridget and my younger son, and she started describing for him, of course he couldn't talk, how he was feeling. Oh, you are sad and mad and upset, speaking for him out loud, everything he's doing, just like she was when he was playing. You're taking more. Oh, you're getting more. You like the red one. All those things that we thought were just playing, but she was teaching him on his level, down on the floor with him in what he wanted to do, letting him lead the way, how to regulate his feelings and what was happening just by talking about it. Whereas so vastly different from what I was told by every doctor and every person, that, you know, if someone behaves this way and would throw a board game or, you know, meltdown or yell or scream, that they are to be punished. They have to go in timeout. They have to have things taken away from them. And it had put such a wedge in the relationship of my older son and I for so long. In every piece of DIR, we never met my older son at his developmental level. We never thought that he was developmentally delayed, but it was such a huge eye opener to say that you can see if your child doesn't learn to read in typical time or doesn't learn to tie their shoes, and you think they need help. But because they can't behave, that's punishment. They're making that choice. That's what the world thinks most of the time, because what they're displaying is so negative. If they're yelling and screaming or attacking, that it doesn't ever get looked at as something that needs help. Well, they need help because they can't behave, right? So what's making them? But that was never on the radar. But it is when you follow the model for DIR. You go to see their developmental differences, or where they are developmentally, their individual differences. And then, of course, let's talk about relationship based. I had really ruined my relationship with my older son because there was no trust there, because I was doing what everyone told me that I had to do to not be a coward parent, right? So, and he had no trust in me because I'm the one that he needed help from, and I wasn't giving it to him. And I'll forever, I mean, I had doctors tell me that if I don't call the police on him at 7 years old, the next time he hits someone, don't come back. And I did that, and that's forever etched in my mind, the look on his cute little face when the police walked in. So the difference that when DIRFloortime came in and I start realizing this, and I'm going back and forth, and it was just so huge to me. The first thing I think I realized, it was okay for me to be nice to my kid. You know, it was okay for me to say, I want to help you, and I wasn't being weak. I wasn't being a bad parent, but that isn't the way it had been played out to me. So watching my younger son thrive from this treatment and this therapy, and all I wanted to do was get my older son back in the house and start trying to treat him this way. And we had then, at that point, we lived in what I called a barter system when he was a teenager. Just to get him to do things, that go to school, brush his teeth, I had to give him some. Well, what are you going to give me? Because we were in this horrible situation. So I kind of made a deal with him that I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to tell him all of this, and it really wasn't the time. He wasn't really ready to hear it. He wasn't developed enough to hear it. He was still in it a lot. But I wanted to tell him that I was right all along. I'm sorry that I've done this to you. I'm sorry. So I made a deal with him that he could go where he wanted to go if he just let me. He goes, fine, tell me what's wrong with me. And just in that statement alone is what he thought we all thought of him, that something was wrong with him. And so I started going, oh, geez, where do I begin? When you would melt down in stores, maybe the lights were affecting you, the noise, you didn't like it, you didn't like the feeling, because he used to take his clothes off when the bus was coming down. Maybe you didn't like the feeling, the stuff on your skin. And I started rattling off all these things I wanted to say that I've now discovered weren't you being bad. And he said, you are so stupid. And I said, what? He goes, you're so stupid that you don't realize everybody feels that way. When he said that, that was a life-changing moment for me, because everybody doesn't feel that way. But it was the first time that I realized he doesn't know that. He only knows what he knows. So now, to add to it, we've been treating him as if he should just be typical, when he doesn't know typical, because that's not what he is. And this all came to be because of DIFloortime. It took me 17 at that point, and for the next 3 years, I treated him with DIR and every interaction that I had with him, if at all possible, right? It was very difficult because he was a teenager now. He's going through all the normal teenage things. But I tried to take a step back, put myself in his shoes, look at it from his perspective, what might be bothering him, why he might be doing this. I mean, there's so many stories I could tell you. He used to whip, if I gave him change for money for lunch, he'd whip it at me and say, "How dare you give me change?" And of course, every doctor would say he's manipulating, but change was confusing to him. He didn't want to, there were so many things. But when I started doing the DIR for him, on him, with him, without him really knowing it, I just totally stopped punishing him. First of all, we started to build a relationship. Finally, that relationship piece started coming in. He started building trust. There was trust that was being built because I wasn't reacting. And I am such a firm believer. I've told teachers for years after that, even with my younger son, that the make or break for how it's going to go with you is really how you react to him, not really so much what he's doing. Meeting Bridget, she knows that she's forever one of my most loved people in my life. She just was always, she exudes DIR, right? She just constantly is doing that. The first time I went to speak with her, for parents, which was probably 12 years ago now, one of the questions from a parent was, "How often do you do floor time?" And I said, "Well, I live it now. Like I use it in everything. I'm an owner of a business now, and I use it with my employees, even in dealing with them, right? Everyone. I think that's just the way that we should be. Understand where this person is. Understand the differences they have. Build a relationship with them. That it makes a huge difference in almost every aspect of life of dealing with people in general. And it's helped me. My younger son. Schooling for him was so different. Everything for him was so different because of this. He had a completely different outcome. And I remember even in school when he was first in a 711, and when he went to an integrated classroom, on the very first day, they called me, and he would make noises at his table. Psh, psh, everything was being turned into something funny for someone who didn't talk. He made a lot of noises. So they would call me and say, "Well, he got put in red," and they had a red, yellow, green system. So when he got put in red, the whole week was done, because if he got put in red on Monday, he lost Friday playtime. So because of what I learned from Bridget and DIR, I was able now, something I was never able to do with my older son. I went into those meetings feeling like the minority, the bad mother. This time I went in knowing, and I said, "This is not going to work out. He can't, there's no reason for him to even look forward to anything. Besides that, it's not his fault that he can't regulate himself in this situation." So they did an awesome thing. They worked with me. They learned some of these things. They were very open to it. And they switched his red, yellow, green just for him in the room to, he would put himself in red, yellow, green, depending on how he was feeling. And he could either go, I think the first thing was, go back to the room. I don't feel like I can pay attention. Then he also got to leave the room and go walk around the school with a weighted backpack. They did give him a bouncy chair. And then if he was really having a bad day, and this is the one that is kind of life-changing for us as well, he would have some meltdowns at school in the earlier years and throw things and not listen. So if he was that was red for him, he could take his box that they had given him and go across the hall into an empty room. Well, in this box, they put in like stress balls and different things for him to regulate himself. And one day he pulled out a notepad and paper, which he had never done before. And he wrote down, "So-and-so and Jim today didn't follow the rules." It was and that had been 3 periods earlier. So it was so eye-opening for us to discover that from someone who couldn't hardly communicate, I was just hardly speaking now, that he was having this meltdown 3 periods later because so-and-so didn't follow the rules hours ago. He couldn't get past that. But we would never, those things could have been going on all day for my older son, but we had no way of knowing that. And how would they have known this if they just punished him and took his free time away? Instead, in implementing some of these things from DIR, which got him to that box and got him to write, we were able to see into a world we didn't understand, right? We didn't know why. You know, they could have made a million assumptions about why he was having a meltdown, but none of them would have been right. So I thought it was just, I could go on. I wouldn't want to take up everybody's time, but I could go on and on about how life-changing DIR has been for us and will continue to be. I still continue to this day to build that relationship with my older son, who's 32, and with my younger son. I use it all the time, even though we aren't receiving technically the services anymore.
Yes, very, very, very touching story. Thank you for your vulnerability, sharing the experiences with your son. I know how much parents beat themselves up for, having regrets about things that we did or how we might have impacted our children. And I'm so happy to hear that you were able to start rebuilding that relationship with your son. And that's, something that I hear people talk about a lot, is that, rupture and repair that psychologist Dan Siegel talks about, and I'm sure lots of others too, where you might have a rupture in the relationship, but you can always repair it and move forward. And a lot of what you said, I'm sure that parents listening can totally, it totally resonates with them. So thank you so much for sharing all of those experiences.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Heather.
So we did a lot of DIR Floortime services with my older son when he was in pre-K 4, and he made a lot of progress that year. A lot of the time after those computer virtual sessions during COVID, my husband and I would say, I have no idea what they were doing because we couldn't really track what they were working on. And we had experienced the ABA model that was very regimented. But my son learned to love his therapies. And at the time, I had no idea how they were related. Now we can talk more about regulation and co-regulation. But over the course of that year, my son did make a lot of progress where we could take him out into public. We could walk down the sidewalk and he was just holding hands. It wasn't constantly running away or grabbing him from running in front of a car. So it was very real progress we saw. They focused a lot on potty training in the ABA preschool. And I actually told them multiple times, you have to stop, because my son would get so upset. And I was thinking as a mom, he doesn't know these people. Why would it feel safe to be in a bathroom with strangers telling you to sit on the toilet? To me, it seemed very strange. And I was told, oh, everybody works on the potty, whatever. So we just stopped working on potty training. He was 4 years old and we just stopped because we thought, we are not fighting with him about this. He'll either be potty trained or he won't. And during that year with Bridget and Eric and Lori and Kara, he just kind of potty trained himself. He just one day started going on the potty and it was fine. So we saw all this very real progress. But when he started transitioning to kindergarten, that was like a whole different fight, because once you go into the public school system, they kind of have a set plan of services that they have available. And we were used to very understanding people at that point. So that was a very difficult transition. I think that with my older son, especially, it has been constantly going up and down with our experiences, because thank God my family is very understanding. Now we know there's a lot of neurodiversity in my family. Some family members were actually diagnosed as adults after my son was. And so when I talked to my mother, she was the most understanding person. Whenever we were having a hard time, when my oldest was a toddler, she was the most understanding, but she also just thought it was all very typical child behavior because some of her kids did that too. So she just said, oh, all kids don't like pants like that. Or, she made these comments. So it was very understanding. And then with ABA, it was the complete opposite. And then we found Bridget's team, and then going to public school, the teachers were all kind, but there's only so much they can do in a general education classroom when they have so many kids. And he became so overwhelmed. We actually ended up because of a number of experiences that year, we homeschooled him the second half of kindergarten because it was just not sustainable. And by that time, we had my youngest. So I think when he was only a couple months old, I knew he would get an autism diagnosis as well. I mean, every autistic person is different, but my two sons are so different. Where my oldest, I think it was almost difficult to get a referral for an autism evaluation because he was so affectionate and he loved being with mom and dad, and he couldn't speak verbally, but he could make his needs known if he was with mom and dad or with my mom. And with my youngest, it was harder to get that connection. It was harder for us to even get him to interact with us or to enter into his world. And at that point, thank goodness we knew more about Floortime. So with our experience with Floortime with my youngest, fortunately, some of my oldest son's therapists were able to start working with my youngest, and watching them interact with him, it was just magical because we had already experienced Floortime now for years, but this is a completely different kid. It's a different experience. And watching his speech therapist play with him when all he wants to do is push a shovel up and down the driveway. He loved our snow shovel being out all year long, so he could push it up and down the driveway, and he would just run alongside him. And, that was their game. And that fostered that communication. I think if we had tried to sit him in a chair and make him color or play with Play-Doh or, follow those scheduled activities, it would have been a nightmare. It would have been sitting on top of him to get him to sit at the table. And I think a lot of the growth that we've seen, he's only 3 now, but a lot of the growth we've seen, I think, is only because of Floortime, because they're just like everywhere. I'm sure there are a lot of therapist shortages, and sometimes you get whoever is available because you're grateful there's anyone to help. But we have had some more behaviorally minded people come in, and you can immediately see them butting heads. And we have had to say occasionally, this is just not going to work because I just can't watch my son be in distress. We did this before. We've learned from it, and we are not doing it again because we're not learning anything. None of us are gaining anything when we're sitting through a session, everyone heart racing.
I hear you. I hear you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's such a humbling experience to be put in the world of typical kids. And so when you say like starting school was so difficult, I mean, I can just feel how much you must have been deflated having that experience, because everything was really positive and it's really strengths based DIR, and then you just get shoved in your face like deficit, deficit, deficit. And for you to have the strength or whatever it is to stand up and advocate for your child and do what's best for your child, I think that's very commendable, because it's hard to do. And like you say, you felt more supported now because you had that DIR background, and with the neurodiversity movement and everything like that, people are starting to understand autism a bit more. Not as much as we'd like, of course, but I think that's what's so powerful about DIR, and why I wish everybody could know about DIR, because of course a lot of the behavioral minded people totally mean well, and they just don't know, or it doesn't resonate with what how they think things should be. And it's also very difficult if you haven't parented a child like this to understand what they're going through, and you can think that you know what they're going through, but yeah, it's again, lots of stuff resonating with listeners, I'm sure. Let's go to Megan and Mark.
I go from an opposite direction on this whole thing. When I was told about Floortime, I was honestly, I was like, there's no way that's not going to work. There's no way that's going to be something that our son is going to go for, and we're not going to be able to handle that. And that's going to be something that we're going to give up in 6 months, and
4.5 years later.
Yeah, 4.5 years later, here we are, and it's going strong. But I think it's hard to explain. I think it was. I always thought of the tough love type thing. That's kind of how I grew up, and I didn't understand autism at all. He might as well have had a third eye when he was born, the way that things were. When I was told about autism, I had no idea what it was or anything. And I believe it helped me understand it a lot more on exactly what it was we were dealing with, and what he was dealing with, and how to deal with him and have a relationship with him a lot better. And I think that's still strong today. I think it grows every day because of the way the system works for us, and just how, I don't know how else to explain it. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, Bridget has taught us how to see things from his perspective and how to really meet him where he's at. And depending on the kind of day we're having, how we handle things, if we push him that day or if we don't push him that day, how much we force him to do. And it's really worked out in our favor, because in preschool, he would not participate whatsoever. He did not, when they did circle time and stuff, he would not participate. And now in second grade, he sits for circle time. He answers questions. He sits down and he does his work. But like we said, we were lucky enough. I had to call and beg. I'm not going to lie. I called and begged for a spot at a DIRFloortime school. And we were lucky enough to get a spot. And it's really worked out in our favor. And he's just blossoming every day. And his ability to communicate has just grown in leaps and bounds.
That's wonderful. And I guess I wasn't aware that there is a DIRFloortime school in the Buffalo area.
Only till second grade. So next year we're going to struggle, but
Oh, okay.
right now we're doing great.
Okay. Well, I mean, also hopefully the foundation is there that he can then, have that foundation of trust and everything, and then hopefully advocating and working with the teachers and working on.
Bridget has told us we can have a DIRFloortime consult, and then we can request mentoring as well for when we have to transfer schools next year. So we will be doing that so that the DIRFloortime can continue, because it's the only thing that we found that really works for him.
Yes, I hear you 100%. I still get that reaction from many adults looking at my child's behavior, thinking like, what's wrong? Why can't he do that? Just assuming that it's something that every child should do, when, I can see that it's really hard for him, and it might just be something simple, like a simple direction, but, there's just a huge reaction to it. And unless you know that DIRFloortime way to engage and, really understand how to follow his lead to get that engagement and to make him be able to trust what you're going to do. Otherwise, it's really scary, and I don't know what you're about to do, and I don't trust it. So yeah, it's such a minor shift, in my opinion, that so many people could make to make things so much easier for autistic kids. But if you don't know how to do that, then it's super challenging. So I hear a theme of really finding something that really worked for you guys at DIRFloortime in parenting your children, helping you understand your children, finding connection with them. Really, I guess we didn't talk directly about, maybe we can just go one more time around, quickly talking about how it changed your view of your child. So I know Bethany spoke to this a little bit. You said that you understood that now, okay, my child needs help. Like, it's not that he's being bad. So that's a bit of it. Did any of you have feelings that your child wasn't capable? And then I guess when your son, Bethany, younger son, did the more symbol, you were maybe surprised, like, I didn't realize he could do that much. I didn't presume competence, as we'll say in floor time. Did DIR change your view about your child's capabilities or potential going forward? We'll go around one more time. Yep.
Yeah, that's a great question. It definitely did, and I have to be reminded of it a lot, because you slip back into easily, because then you kind of go into a mode of protection, right? So, well, he can't do that, or he can't do that, and it has changed my view of it. Like, when we talk about that more, that was flooring to us that he knew it, because we thought he didn't we didn't know what he knew, right? He, at that same amusement park, he walked into water, went above his head, and he just kept walking in it. So it was kind of like, he was just, we kind of thought he doesn't understand anything really, but he understood so much. And his cars and their colors, and the SpongeBob characters and Sesame Street characters and their colors, like he had a life assignment to those things that he used to communicate with us. Like, and I can't get into the details of that now. It was just so extensive, but it was very, very smart. But even I constantly have to remind myself of that. One of you mentioned the eating. I think Megan and Mark, we all know that there's eating issues with children a lot of times on the spectrum. And my younger son definitely has that. He has a very, very small pool of things that he'll eat, and they have to be perfect. And he does eat purple grapes, not green, but they can't be torn, and they have to be freshly washed. And there's a whole lot of things. So I now, as I mentioned, own a restaurant, and one of my other children, my other son that I haven't talked about, said to me, we really need a dishwasher, and everyone else his age is washing dishes now. And I thought, well, he's never washed a dish at home. He's never cooked himself anything. He can't stand gross stuff, right? Washing dishes in a restaurant is disgusting, right? He's not going to do this. And but then I thought, you know what? I'm going to take myself out of it, because I might be not giving him this credit, and I'm going to let my son deal with it. And I said, you call him and get him in here and show him how to do it. He is our best dishwasher. He will not let a dish go out with a speck of dirt on him. I can guarantee you that. I thought that he would be disgusted, and it is disgusting, but he doesn't. He wants it perfect. He is one of our most amazing dishwashers. So he continues to astound me at his abilities. And I did want to mention that he also astounded us. I mean, he did learn to speak. Probably by the time he was 6 or 7, he was fully speaking. And about a year ago now, the same older son, not the oldest, but the other one, said, have you called his phone lately? I said, no, why? He goes, you got to call it right now and get the answering machine. He fully sings a message on his answering machine. He's got a great singing voice. Unbelievable. And now he sings all the time. So the other people at the restaurant will say, that kid can sing anything from Frank Sinatra to Queen. I mean, he's constantly humming and singing and skipping as he's putting the dishes away, which is not a quality that the other kids his age that are working there have. They're like, have girlfriends and watching football and stuff like that. He's into football too, but and he's just so safe in his environment, though. He's fine with it. He doesn't mind, and everyone loves him. Everyone accepts him and loves him. And DIR did change, but I constantly have to go back to it. And I think for those of you that have younger kids, you'll have to remind yourself, because we get kind of in the mode of protection to say, well, he can't do that. But he did the dishwashing job, and he did it great. So just, letting him show his individual differences, building that relationship with him, everything, it just continually, I can't say it enough, it just continually changes our life, and we continue to follow it.
Amazing, amazing. How about you, Heather?
I think with my older son, we didn't know about DIR at first, and then I was very much in protection mode through a lot of his years of therapies. And I mean, at some points I was just not honest with therapists, and I wasn't even telling them what we were concerned about, because I was hiding what I felt they would think he was doing wrong, so they wouldn't work on it, because I didn't like the way things were worked on. So it was really with talking with Bridget and those of DIR Floortime. I feel like my husband and I learned to relax a little bit about things that we thought needed to be worked on, or that he couldn't do, or things that were going wrong. We paused, where we stopped feeling like everything was an emergency. Like, it's very stressful when your child will only eat McDonald's, which is what we experienced when he went to kindergarten. It was begging him to even eat a Happy Meal, because he was so rigid when he was stressed with everything else going on in his day. And working and being patient and allowing him to help in the kitchen and kind of going with that flexibility. He also only loves purple grapes that have to be cold and only the perfect texture. But we just recently went on vacation and he ordered cheeseburger tacos. And I was like, what is that? Like, I would never eat that myself, but sure. And he ate them. And I think as the years go by, we're seeing more and more progress that is just such a pleasant surprise instead of this feeling of urgency of we have to expand his diet. We have to have him try this many vegetables or whatever. It takes that sense of urgency away in that we'll be open to it. We're working on it, but it's not something that has to happen right now or we're going to have a quote unquote bad outcome. I think with my younger son, we're still in the thick of things a little bit where even taking a bath is very distressing. Getting wet is very distressing. And my husband and I, the other kids were signed up for swim lessons this past summer, and we just decided we're going to try the toddler swim lessons. And the first day was very distressing. My husband, I think he said he cried through the entire first lesson. And we were then very open with the instructor and just said, we're going to try this. We're not going to force him to follow what the class is doing. We just want to see if we can learn pool safety. And by the end of class, the sessions that summer, he loved it. And it's really because we tried to keep in mind, sometimes we just say, what would Lori say? Because we have to keep them in our brain of how do we handle this? How do we stay calm? How do we make this more of a back and forth playing together instead of this distressing moment?
Yes, I resonate with everything you said too. And isn't it almost like we've all been brainwashed to think that children need to do certain things and say certain things instead of just getting to know the child that we have. And they amaze us all the time. And it's only when we're comparing them, like I've given this example before on a podcast where we had to go to a birthday party and then I noticed how much my son couldn't handle it. And he's been to other birthday parties and it worked out fine. But this particular birthday party, it just wasn't working out. And then you go home feeling so deflated. And then I realized, well, the reason I haven't experienced this is because we've really put supports in place so that he has his best life and he doesn't need to feel distressed. And then when I put him in this more typical environment that's hard for him, then I was so upset. But it's like, well, I don't do things that I don't like. Like, I'm not going to willingly go on a roller coaster because I'm terrified of roller coasters. So why would I ever do that? And as adults, we get to choose what we want to do. But as children, they're sort of put in all these situations. And anyway, let's hear from Megan and Mark.
Yes, when he was younger, we did all the therapies and we felt like he was really behind. We did feeding therapy for a couple years. It was useless, let's be honest. Like, he eats his food, but then he'll shock us. Like, one day he came over and grabbed a slice of pizza and then he ate it and we were surprised. So he shocks us every day. When he was really young, we didn't know what he knew. Like the other moms have said, it was really when we got on his level and we were kind of open up to total communication. And something he still does is he'll pull up videos on his iPad and that's what he's thinking about. And that's like, he wanted me to turn the lights on the Christmas tree the other day and he pulled up a video and in the title it said lights and he's like on and was pointing to the Christmas tree. So it was like, we didn't know what he knew until we were kind of open to whatever communication he was choosing at that moment. So now he just amazes us every day. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that's just it. Every day you feel like there's something more that comes up, like out of the blue, like he'll do something and you're like, I didn't even know you could do that. And that's the great feeling you have. And I think Floortime actually helps us with that. I just like she said, with what was he doing the other day when you guys were joking around with each other?
Oh, I gave him a new rule because he keeps spilling things. And I was like, do you understand? He's like, maybe. And he started laughing. Like, he knew he was being funny, but
just things like
we didn't know he could do that before. He was just making a joke.
He never made jokes before or anything like that. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, you'll get a joke, and you're like, where'd that come from? And I think that has a lot to do with Floortime, just the way that we act around him and the way he acts around us and the relationship that it formed between all of us. So, yeah.
I mean, being autistic is a different way of being, and it's not any worse or less. And yes, there are challenges that need support for sure. But I thank you all for taking the time to share this with me. I know we could have talked for another 3 hours for sure, but it's just so nice for people listening to hear parent examples because, you know, I'm one parent and I'm giving my examples every week. So I love having other parents. And thank you to Mark, because we often don't hear from a lot of fathers. And so it's really nice to hear a father's perspective as well. So thank you for being on the podcast too. Thank all of you.